Today in the EU, Poland confronted with its Eurosceptic past. October 2023 marked the end of 8 years of nationalist government in Poland with the election of EU supporter Donald Tusk. Brussels welcomed his rise to power and unfroze billions in funds to Poland. But change does not happen overnight. The Polish Prime Minister is now confronted with an electorate divided over how the government should address farmer protests, cost of living crisis, and attitudes towards the European Union. Will he succeed in steering Poland away from Euroscepticism? Hello and welcome. I'm Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. To understand better the European context, we're first speaking about the Polish fallout on the nature restoration law with Donna Kenny, environmental editor at Eurosceptic. Hi, Donna. You've been closely following the developments on nature restoration law, and we've talked about it before on the podcast as well. What has been happening?
Yeah, Hungary had just decided not to support the nature restoration law, and that meant that the law just didn't have enough support within the council to pass. Now, things haven't gone well for the law since then. There's been a few developments. The Belgian Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, came out over the weekend to give an interview reiterating again his opposition to the law. Now, the Belgians were quick to make a difference between his personal opinion and the formal position of Belgium.
This is what the Belgian Minister of Climate Transition, Alain Marron, commented late last month.
In fact, the Belgian presidency is approaching the file as any other file, as a honest broker. And our task is to pass files, and we are doing exactly that for the NRL. And we'll continue to do that.
But it doesn't bode well because Belgium hold the presidency. So it's their job to broker a compromise with other member states. And it's going to be really hard for them to convince member states to support the law when their own prime minister is talking very publicly about his opposition to it.
And have other countries changed their position as well?
That wasn't the only development. Finland, it now appears, are coming out and opposing the law. Previously, they abstained against it. And the rumours is that the Belgian presidency reached out and asked them to support it. And in fact, instead of doing that, they went the opposite direction as well. And of course, we have Poland as well, who have indicated that instead of abstaining on the law, they're going to oppose it. It doesn't change the maths, as in the voting numbers. It doesn't matter whether you abstain or whether you vote against. All that matters is whether you support. But the issue is, with all these countries hardening their position, it's going to be much tougher for the Belgian presidency to actually find a country who's willing to switch and get them over that threshold of 65%.
Right. So as things stand right now, is there a chance that negotiations could fail, that the law could not pass through?
There is a chance. It's an extremely high chance. None of the people I've spoken to in the last week were particularly optimistic about that law. And of course, this is all in the context of the elections in June, the European elections, which are expected to turn a more right-wing parliament, which is going to make it even tougher to get these kind of environmental files over the line.
And among those countries that have been vocal about their concerns when it comes to nature restoration law, we also have Poland. What has been happening in Poland? What are the concerns that have been brought forward?
Yeah, when it became clear that Hungary was going to vote against the nature restoration law, there was hope in some quarters that perhaps Poland could be encouraged to vote in favour of the law to get it over the line. And of course, these were buoyed up with these hopes by the election of the new centralist government, pro-EU, the hope that, this new Tusk government would be more favourable to proposals coming from Europe. Donald Tusk, centrist, pro-European, wahey, but actually now he's in government and he's joined with the rest of the EPP in kind of rebelling against it and defending what he perceives as Poland's interests. And that's placating the farmers as well. So there were initial hopes that Poland might be able to step in to replace Hungary. But in fact, around the time of the Environmental Council meeting, Prime Minister Donald Tusk came out and reiterated his personal opposition to the nature restoration law. And from what we hear, there was actually a fight within the Polish government cabinet about this topic, with the climate and energy minister being very much in favour of the law, but she wasn't able to get that over the line, and Donald Tusk had the final say, and so Poland are opposing the law. It seems to be motivated by similar concerns as across the rest of Europe. So Donald Tusk, in his quote which he put out around the time said that, yes, we'll probably be able to block this proposal altogether. He did acknowledge the need for nature restoration law. He did reference the farmers. He said that nature restoration was in the longer term interests of the farmers, but he made 2 points. One is that he doesn't want it to be imposed upon Poland, so perhaps a bit of a nationalist angle there as well. And the other is money as well. He wants Polish farmers to get money for whatever inconvenience they may suffer on account of the nature restoration law. So kind of a classic national interest in play there again.
Thank you, Donna. Yet Donald Tusk softening towards a more conservative stance on the matter hasn't so far satisfied the opposition. Robert Tillus, former Polish agriculture minister from PiS, claims PM Tusk isn't proactive for farmers, giving priority to EU Green Deal votes instead. We're continuing the conversation with Eurosceptic correspondent from Poland, Aleksander Krzysztoszek, to delve deeper into the domestic political tensions Donald Tusk is facing. Alexandra, what fuels Euroscepticism among Polish citizens?
Well, in the previous years, the approval for the EU in Poland hit the records, so it's kind of normal that it has to drop at some point. But speaking of the exact reasons, well, it's partially because of the geopolitical situation for most Poles, especially the older people. The world around us is becoming more distant, more unpredictable, and even hostile, and the EU is just a part of it. So they tend to be skeptical of the EU.
And what challenges are you referring to exactly?
Poland is becoming to feel the cost of living in the Western world, rising living costs, which the Polish people expect to even rise, fueled by the green and energy transition in the coming years.
Yes, precisely. We were just talking about this with our Euractiv environmental editor. When it comes to Donald Tusk's reluctance in supporting the imposition of nature restoration law on domestic ground, would you say that this is the main fear, that the EU would impose something on Poland that would make the cost of living even direr?
A lot of Polish people believe that the regulations that have been established in Brussels were not consulted with the society, and they were imposed by the EU without caring about the fate of the less affluent people. And they are afraid that those less affluent will bear the biggest burden of those regulations.
Right, and the EU skeptic PiS party has been getting leverage, political leverage, precisely using this argument. The party seems to still be swaying the country's decision at the political level despite the end of its role in October 2023. How much influence does it still retain over the political landscape?
This still enjoys high approval among the Polish society, and in fact, its support is comparable to that of the ruling coalition in the polls. And the ongoing farmers' protests fuel the farmers' dissatisfaction with the new government. The farmers hope that the new coalition would do better with addressing the farmers' concerns and pursuing the demands in the EU than the PiS government did. And now a lot of farmers believe the new government let them down, so this may translate into the renewed influx of support for PiS.
What has been the role of the nationalist PiS party in shaping this narrative at the EU level?
There has been a strong smear campaign about the EU in the recent years and the PiS government. The EU was identified with the voice of Germany and not caring very much about Poland's interests. And last but not least, there is rising skepticism towards the EU among the rural communities. And it is mainly driven by the European Green Deal, which hit the farmers in recent months very hard.
Do you think that this disappointment towards the new government also extends beyond farmers and into broader society?
Farmers are an important part of the electorate in Poland. But, Polish society is highly polarized right now. Like half of the society supports the actions of the new government or even would like them to be more radical, like the women being dissatisfied with the insufficient actions by the government on abortion laws. And the second half, the half that supports peace, tend to criticize the changes in the media that Tusk's government introduced. They basically believe that it was not the peace government, but the Tusk's one that really breaks the rule of law in Poland.
Do you see regional elections outcome being influenced by this?
Regional elections in Poland are quite a different story than the general elections, the parliamentary ones, with many of the candidates not belonging to political parties, but rather to local committees. But still, to some extent, the regional elections definitely reflect the national sentiments of individual parties. And traditionally, the more progressive and pro-EU parties like Tusk's Civic Platform or the left gain support in bigger cities like Warsaw or Gdańsk, while these tend to excel in rural areas.
And I'm sure the debates on nature restoration law will have an influence on that. On top of that, you've been reporting on recent findings about Poles when it comes to Poles' skepticism towards joining the Eurozone. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Most Poles are skeptical of joining the Eurozone, and what is interesting, this is a tendency in both the voters of the ruling coalition and those of the opposition. And among the voters of peace and anti-EU Confederation Party, about 95% oppose the euro. And it's partially a consequence of the smear campaign towards the EU and peace government. Moreover, the Polish people tend to be afraid of the rising inflation and consequently the prices when joining the Eurozone, as well as the country losing control over its own fiscal policy, like giving the competences into the hands of Brussels. And a lot of people, I believe, they more or less consciously treat Poland's own currency as one bastion of the country's sovereignty, which they wouldn't like to give up to Brussels.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm Jada Santana, and this was Euractivist Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractivist to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. This episode was produced by Miriam Sanz de Tejada, Nicoletta Yonta, Evi Chiori, and myself. See you tomorrow! As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.